Good morning, everybody. It is week 11. We are live. I'm Joel Worth. That's my buddy Jameson Hutchinson. Jameson, how you doing? I think this is a fun slate. What do you think?
It's a little goofy, but if you dive a little deeper, it ends up being pretty all right. We got 8 games in the early window. We only got 3, so everybody can have their eyes on Patrick Mahomes versus Josh Allen in the afternoon portion of the
Yeah.
program. And the night game, if you're playing on FanDuel, which we'll get into here in a little bit, Justin Herbert versus Joe Burrow, battle of a couple quarterbacks from the same draft class. That seems like that's going to shape up a lot of stuff over on FanDuel. So pretty awesome slate. Like I said, if you look at it, like step back a little bit, it's pretty ugly, but once you kind of get into it a little bit, it ends up being a lot of fun. We find some edges trying to take care of the business here today.
Yeah, so we get 4 games with over-unders at 47 or above. No games at 50, so no monster games on tap. But yeah, I think there's some fun games. No game lower than, there's only one game in the 30s at 39.5. That's the Minnesota game. But we will get to that later. Four teams on bye. Jameson, for the second straight week, we are going to have to deal with no Daniel Jones and no Bryce Young in the pool.
It's just don't know what to do. Times are tough. I don't know. We're going to pray over it, and we're going to get through this together, one way or the other.
I was going to say, we are a community. We will get through this together somehow. All right, let's hit our first game. It's a big one. Ravens and Steelers. Baltimore on the road, 3-point road favorites against Pittsburgh. 48.5 is the over-under on this game, which is kind of crazy because, like, this game, like, it's Tomlin, it's Harbaugh. These games always just turn into rock fights. I mean, these games are usually end up being like 17-13 total, or, finals. But Baltimore's pass defense is terrible. Pittsburgh looks unlocked with Russell Wilson, as crazy as that seems. How are you attacking this one? I think there's a lot to get to in this one.
Yeah, it seems like George Pickens is in like an awesome spot, but it also seems like everybody knows that. So he's going to have a decent amount of ownership. Looking back, I know this Ravens and even the Steelers offense are totally different from the past, but I've lived through Ben Roethlisberger versus Joe Flacco, and it's 13-10, and
Yep.
it comes to the final 2 minutes, and it's just really hard to get away from that. So I like this game. I think it's going to go under owned just because of how expensive it gets. I think Russell Wilson ends up being a really fun tournament play that will probably go overlooked. We saw Mike Williams get there with a deep bomb last week, excuse me, in his basically Steelers debut. And then George Pickens, I mean, the Ravens have given it up to the number 1 wide receivers, so it just ends up being an awesome spot for them. And then on the other side for the Ravens, it gets very expensive if you want to play Lamar Jackson, if you want to play, Andrews or Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers is probably going to be one of these guys that's under owned. But the one thing I do want to point out, and it was brought up when the Steelers played Washington, I believe it was last week, they talked about how they deal with Lamar Jackson or basically have the blueprint to stop him every time they play. So I don't expect Lamar Jackson to go absolutely nuclear here going up against the Steelers defense, but it's still, for the history here, I think it's a really fun game environment for him. So I'm going to try to get to it. Like I said, it's much easier to play the Russell stuff and have a bring back on the Ravens side. But if you want to play like Lamar, Zay Flowers, bring back with George Pickens, and kind of put your money towards the wide receivers and find a couple cheap running backs, it gets very difficult. But this is definitely a game environment that I want to get into today.
Yeah, there's a ton to like. I mean, I think Russell Wilson's still a little bit underpriced, so if you want to go there, I'm okay with that. I'm good, like starting Lamar naked if that's what you need to do. I do like bringing him back with Pickens, but yeah, I for as much as this game, like I said, these games normally turn into rock fights. I think this is going to be a pretty high scoring game. Obviously, the over under reflects that at 48.5. So I think this is a game you're probably going to want to have some access to.
Yeah, and just like Lamar Jackson ends up being 9K over on FanDuel, and then on DraftKings, he's going to end up being in the same ballpark, 8K. So both the highest end quarterback, and we're going to get through this. It's much easier this week to find a cheaper quarterback and Once again, the running backs are going to smash. One guy we haven't talked about is the big dog Derrick Henry. I don't think anybody's going to play him, but he could end up, you know, 2 touchdowns like always and kind of get there with low ownership. So, I mean, he comes in right behind Christian McCaffrey. He made a return last week and looked really good. Tyrod Williams, Bijan. It gets pricey, but like I said, if you don't get contrarian, I don't think anybody's going to play the big dog today. Just too expensive, and they'd rather have a better matchup, so to speak, save for the Ravens. So it's expensive, but this definitely, like I said, is a game I'm trying to get into.
Yeah, Henry's interesting in that if you're going to pay that much, wouldn't you rather just go to McCaffrey?
Yeah,
But
you would,
yeah, so
you
I,
would
I
think.
think he's going to be low owned, but like you said, he's a guy who can always just get you 2 touchdowns, just kind of falling in the end zone. So
Yeah.
an interesting kind of contrarian play there.
Yeah, Zay Flowers and George Pickens ends up in this 75, 7,600 range, and it's going to be the same over on DraftKings. It's going to be that middle of the pack. Like I tried to do some builds this morning, and it ends up I just kind of punt at wide receiver. Honestly, as much as I
Yep.
don't like it, yeah, they have them flip flopped here, but it's the same mid tier wide receiver. If you're going to play these guys, you pay up for quarterback, you pay up for running back. There's not a whole lot of punt plays this week, and it just gets very difficult. So I don't think this game you can full on stack it without hurting the rest of your lineup, but trying to grab a piece or two here uh, makes a lot of sense, obviously.
Yeah, and I think the big picture this week is there's no like free square,
No.
but I think the value is in the mid range receivers. So I think you want to pay up for running back and just kind of just kind of feast off those kind of middle tier receivers, and we'll get to those as we get there. So let's move on to our next game. That is the Las Vegas Raiders traveling to Miami, going to South Beach as 7.5 point underdogs. The total on this game is 44. So Miami has a 25.75 implied total. The Raiders at 18.25. Miami coming off the Monday night game, short week. And Vegas coming off the bye. So this is an interesting spot for both teams.
Yeah. Talking about these middle tier wide receivers, I think Jacoby Myers, he's going to be in my cash game pool today. And if I need a wide receiver, I'm definitely going to pick him in some tournaments as well. His last couple weeks, they got Gardner Minshew back in, so saves you from the Desmond Ritter disaster. 17 points, 14 points, 10 points. Like, with how bad the wide receiver pool's gotten, like, I will gladly take that. And just, I know Brock Bowers is on the other side there, and he's fine, but the rest of the tight ends haven't really gotten there. So I feel like you don't have to play Brock Bowers necessarily, especially with some of the punt tight ends. But on the other side, I wish it's pretty clear that Tyreek Hill's not healthy, and for whatever reason, they just can't get him the ball. I would love to play some Tua stuff today, but I think I'm just going to run it through Achan. He's ends up one of these guys. The Raiders have given up probably the most production out of all the defenses to running backs, and we've seen Achan not only do it on the ground, but he's got this locked in receiving role each week, and he ends up being kind of the wide receiver one right now for the Dolphins with how things are going. So I tried some Tua stuff earlier. Jalen Waddle, I think I've got to retire, or maybe I jinxed it to where he's got his monster game this week. But I mean, he has had time after time after time, and it's like last week it started off really hot. He had a couple touchdowns or a couple catches, and I was like, man, we're finally going to see it. He ends up with like 7 points. It's just I can't do it. I just very frustrating. But I think the pass catchers here for Miami set up nice, and one other guy I'm going to play. I did the two stack I did with Achan. I did it with Jonnu Smith. He ends up being like a punt tight end who's kind of quietly gotten some production. If they get through that way, I think it opens up some stuff as well. So just Jacoby Myers ends up being my bring back for all the Miami Dolphins pass catchers.
Yeah, HN. I mean, if you're not paying attention to the Dolphins, like Raheem Mostert's the third down back right now, and HN is like he is the first and second down back. He has taken over that backfield, so he's the Miami play. If you're going to have Miami, I don't hate doing an HN Tyreek stack. I think it's a little expensive if you think Miami's going to go off, but if you're going to play Miami, you have to have HN. I mean, it just starts with him.
Yep.
He's fairly. He's not super high price. He's not up there with the McCaffreys and He's $8,700 on FanDuel, so $1,000 cheaper than McCaffrey, $700 cheaper than Derrick Henry on a site where on the half PPR site. So yeah, he's going to be in almost all my lineups this week, honestly.
Yeah, it's a great spot for him. Like Tyreek Hill, he ends up in this Cooper Cup, Justin Jefferson
Yeah,
area where it's like that's really expensive for what he's like. He's not even been schemed into the games. Like last week, seemed
right.
like he was doing like the decoy stuff that you know, just I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But this ends up being a really nice spot for the Dolphins if they can make it work. And they since they won last week, they're in the playoff hunt still with how the
Right.
AFC is. So that's not. I thought this was a team that could kind of like close up shop, but this they're going to keep fighting. This is a good spot for them.
Yeah, they've got an insanely soft schedule the rest of the way too, so they are legitimately in the playoff race. All right, let's move on to our next game. That is Cleveland going on the road to take on New Orleans. The Browns 1.5 point road favorites. 44 is the total in this game, so implied totals of 22.75 for the Browns, 21.25 for New Orleans. Saints got their we hate Dennis Allen game out of their system. I think they probably come crashing back to earth in this one. How are you playing it?
Yeah, it's Alvin Kamara is probably going to be the highest owned player throughout this entire slate. Outside like the chalk tight ends, he ends up being the running back that everybody's probably going to go to. Saints defense over on DraftKings is priced up towards the top, but on FanDuel, I believe they're 3,900, and that ends up being middle tier. I'm going to play him in cash, just going up against Jameis Winston. We've seen him; he throws like 3 interceptions, but he should have 7. So if this is a spot for it, I think it sets up here. But on the other side, Jameis stuff's really interesting. He ends up being. Let me check his price real quick. If you pair him with Cedric Tillman, who has gotten like 15 points every time he's played the last month, and then David Njoku, it ends up being cheap enough to where you can smash some of these high end running backs. So 5,500 over on DraftKings, and he ends up being super duper cheap, 7,200 over on FanDuel. So talking about these mid-tier wide receivers, Cedric Tillman ends up being one of these guys that I'm definitely looking at and probably going to jam in a couple lineups. 16, 25, 14 the last 3 weeks. So ends up being just 6,500, a little cheaper than the mid-tier. Like I said, it works well with Jameis if you think that Jameis just chucks it, gets like the 300-yard bonus. Hope you get 2 touchdowns out of his price range. And then David Njoku, 6,600. It's a little pricey, but we've seen these tight end just absolutely fail coming off the bye week and all that stuff. I think it sets up nice for the Browns, especially if they get down trying to come back. And the only other guy I do want to talk about, I'm not going to play him, but Nick Chubb. The matchup on paper, the Saints have given up a lot to running backs, but it just I don't know. I don't think I can do Nick Chubb.
Yeah, it's tough when he just has no role in the receiving game, and Jameis is not a guy who likes to dunk and dink it down and drop it off
Right.
to his running back, so that makes him tough. Cedric Tillman, I mean, I don't think his pricing has caught up to his role in the offense right now. He's there with Ridley, he's there with Amari Cooper, he's there with Khalil Shakir, Brian Thomas. They're all kind of in the same tier, but he's got to be higher than this. His target totals are just absolutely insane the last couple of weeks, ever since Deshaun Watson went out of the lineup. So I think he's going to be super heavily owned this week. So yeah, I'm good with him in cash. I kind of want to fade him in tournaments just because I think his ownership is going to be through the roof. Like when we talk about the mid-tier receivers that are going to be kind of feeding the system this week, he's one of them. I think he's going to be very heavily owned this week.
Yeah, it just when we like I said earlier, when we talk about these wide receivers, the mid tier, there's like 5 or 6 that are priced well enough that they could probably get you 10 to 15 points, and that'll be fine as long as you don't get
Right.
buried by MVS, who is also a part of this game. I don't know if we need to bring him up if people will actually be chasing that. If you are, I salute to you. You got more dog than I do apparently, but it's it's kind of goofy, and we've seen Derek Carr kind of quietly get there a couple times in these just wonky games. I mean, I'm not going to be playing Derek Carr today, but I haven't talked about him. We haven't talked about Taysom Hill. Like his role's been there, even though the production hasn't been the greatest. But he ends up being 6,400, and it just 6, 14, 5. Like tight end has been really bad the last few weeks to where you can punt and it kind of keeps up with the high end guys. So it's really hard for me to justify paying these prices for these top guys unless you're playing tournaments, but I just rather punt tight end and spend elsewhere.
I don't know how you can play Taysom Hill when there's a guy who's $100 more than him on FanDuel that I think is just a screaming play this week. So, and we'll get to
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't get there with Taysom Hill. Can't do it. I mean, he had perfect spot last week and just did absolutely nothing. So, yeah, it's Kamara or nothing on the Saints, and then I like all the passing game options for the Browns in this one.
Yeah. I just if you're playing cash, it really hard to justify not showing up to the dance without Alvin Kamara. I think he's
Yep.
pretty much a lock this week.
Yeah, and I think even in tournaments, I think he's a fine play
Yeah.
just because he's got that passing game upside, and he's really the only real kind of weapon that the Saints have right now. And yeah, if there's anything we can do to help you, if you're new to DFS, just for the love of God, do not play MVS. Do not chase those points. That was his best fantasy game ever. Like as a Packer fan, like as a former Packer, like this is what he does. He has a game with a touchdown or two, and then you think he's going to go off, and then the next week he comes back and has zero touches. So yeah, do not chase the MVS points this week.
Yeah, I think him and Gabe Davis are long lost cousins of some sort because they have very similar profile.
And they have a long lost brother named Will Fuller.
Yep.
All right, moving on. The Colts and the Jets. Indianapolis, a 4-point road underdog. 43.5 is the total. Two really disappointing teams here. Jets 23.75 implied total and 19.75 for the Colts. I think there's some fun stuff in this game, and I don't mind Anthony Richardson. How are you playing this?
Yeah, especially comes out that the Jets have learned the fundamentals of tackling this past week in practice. I mean, the
Good for
professional
them.
football players, 20 plus years experience playing since Pee Wee, but they've gone back to the basics. Good luck tackling Anthony Richardson, who comes back from, I guess he's learned to be a professional from the terms. I don't know what that means, but good for him. He ends up being 6,400 on FanDuel, and I'm going to check his DraftKings price because I don't think I want to play him in cash, but he is an awesome tournament play.
Yep.
5,300.
Yep.
He ends up in this I, it's. I'd rather play Jameis if you're playing on DraftKings as far as cash goes, but tournament play, I think he's awesome. Another guy I want to talk about, Jonathan Taylor. Nobody ever wants to play him. It sets up really nice against the Jets if the Colts are going to win. They're also somehow in the playoff hunt, kind of, I guess. Like the 7 seed is kind of
Barely.
wide open.
Barely.
But we saw him with Flacco. They started to kind of rely on him a little bit. And if they want to win with Richardson, they should rely on Jonathan Taylor and use like RPO and do that stuff. Anytime
Exactly.
Anthony Richardson's in there, they want him to like throw the ball 40 times and be, Tom Brady spraying and praying all across the yard. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Like I said, if the Jets don't know the fundamentals of tackling, it sets up really nice for these two. Really hard to pair Anthony Richardson with a pass catcher. If I would take a chance on Alec Pierce or Adonai Mitchell. I know Josh Downs is there. I think Michael Pittman's back, but I think he's hurt. I'm not going to play Michael Pittman the rest of the year, but I would just hope he kind of land on the bomb. I think Pierce would be my preferred play here. 5,400 over on FanDuel. I mean, that's nice. Like if you play him, you play Anthony Richardson, it opens up a lot for the rest of your lineup here. But Jet stuff, I think Brees is fine. Colts defense gotten a little bit better. I don't believe it. I still think Gus Bradley sucks. I'll say that every week. I'm not going to forget that. But it's I think this game got like a fun environment, but the Jets, they want to play slow.
Yeah.
Pass catchers won't have any ownership. I'd rather play Garrett Wilson over Devontae Adams, but it just I think this game will be a little fun. If you want to play the Colts stuff, it opens up a lot for the rest of your lineups.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on like the Jets' run defense has been really bad. They just got run over by Arizona last week.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like Richardson. I like Taylor. I think that's a fun just running RPOs all day. I think that's how they're going to attack this. So yeah, I think that's a fun kind of tournament stack is to do A-Rich and Taylor. I think it's going to be really unique. I don't think anyone's going there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in a deep tournament field, I kind of like that play. Um, can't I like Josh Downs. I don't think Josh Downs is dead with Richardson, but not this week. And if you look at his pricing, I mean, he's right there with like he's $100 more than a guy that we're going to talk about who's one of my punt plays or not punt plays, but my flag plants this week.
Yep.
In Cortland Sutton. So I can't. There's too many other guys in this like that tier, that area, that pricing range that I like a ton more. So I just can't get there with Downs this week.
Yeah.
I'm going to wait till next week when his price drops a little bit.
I was gonna say I know everybody's scared to play Josh Downs that Anthony Richardson is there. I know it's off of broken coverage, but he did have his best, fantasy game ever with Anthony Richardson. Just saying.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
like everybody's gonna be scared to play it. Like I said, I don't want to play Michael Pittman
No,
really the rest of the year. And let me check FanDuel real quick because he ends up in this range where see if it loads. T. Higgins, $200 more. Cortland Sutton, you just brought up. DeAndre Hopkins, who ends up
yeah,
in a pretty fun. Cedric Tillman.
yeah.
I
You're
mean,
down to Tillman already. So yeah, I'd much rather play him at a lower price than Downs.
right. The only thing I have a little pause on the Colts. It seems like their offensive line's a little banged up, but if anything, it just means more on the run stuff for Anthony Richardson, who the Colts should be running him more to begin with. I mean,
That's all they should be doing, to be honest.
right. So, like I said, this game ends up being pretty fun. I can't play Aaron Rodgers, but I'd be happy to play pass catcher. My preference would be Garrett Wilson. He's been kind of the one that has opened some stuff up compared to Devontae Adams, but I just gets kind of tough.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let's move on to our next game. That is the Minnesota Vikings traveling to Tennessee. Back-to-back road games for the Vikings. Total on this one is 39.5. Vikings 6-point road favorites over the hapless Titans. 22.75 is the implied total for the Vikings. Tennessee at 16.75. That is tied for the lowest implied total of the week with another team from the AFC South. Surprise, surprise.
Yep.
I think there's a couple screaming plays in this one on the Viking side and nothing I'm even remotely interested in Tennessee's. How are you feeling about this one?
Yeah, we saw Sam Darnold look absolutely horrific. We both were on Jordan Addison, who should have gotten there. I mean,
Yep,
the
yep.
Vikings absolutely beat the brakes like on the field until they got in the red zone, and then Sam Darnold went galaxy brained threw like 400 picks in the end zone. I mean, that could have totally
Brutal.
changed everything. The Vikings offense actually looked pretty good until he had all the turnovers, but I really like Aaron Jones in this spot just because I do not think Mayo Boy has the competency to kind of keep up. I think Calvin Ridley as a bringback will get there, but I watched a lot of the Chargers and Titans last week, and the Chargers just kind of sat on the ball. They didn't have to do a whole lot just because Will Levis couldn't really kind of keep up. Titans' defensive line is actually pretty decent, so I worry a little bit with Sam Darnold if he's seeing ghost or gets scared. But I would like to play Aaron Jones and hope that maybe like Titans have a couple turnovers against this really exotic Brian Flores defense. They end up in really good field position. Aaron Jones ends up like falling in the box twice. You pair him with Vikings defense who might get a pick six or I mean, Will Levis has cement feet in the pocket. He does not move, he just sits and then he gets sacked and he looks up and he's like, "What the hell's going on?" It's like, "Do something, dude." So, it's I like Viking stuff this week. I think it's going to go really underowned and I don't think anybody's going to play the pass catchers or Sam Darnold and I think it sets up nice for him too.
Yeah. I want to play the Vikings defense so bad, but they're the second highest priced defense. And in a week like this where there's not a lot of free spots, it's really tough to get them in there. And there's some other options I like. Like you talked about the Saints. If I'm not playing Browns in my lineup, if I'm not playing Cedric Tillman, if I'm not playing Njoku, then I like the Saints at their price, like you said, against Jameis. TJ Hawkinson is just an absolute screaming buy for me this week. He's super cheap. He's 6,500. Like I think Darnold's going to bounce back. Like you said, they were moving the ball up and down the field on Jacksonville as we expected, and then just Darnold just collapsed in the red zone. Man, I love Hawkinson. Like his target share, he's not playing a ton of snaps, but he's getting targets. Like I think he had 9 targets last week and like 30 some snaps. So I think the snap count's going to go up as he gets healthier, and that's just going to lead to maybe his target percentage will go down, but I just
Right.
think it's going to lead to more targets. Honestly, I think this offense is passing game offense is really him and Justin Jefferson. And I do like Justin Jefferson this week in that he's cheaper than Amon-Ra St. Brown on FanDuel. So
Yep.
uh, had a bad week. It's like I know this is a little bit of gambler's fallacy, but how likely is it that Justin Jefferson has 2 bad weeks in a row? It just
Right.
doesn't happen. So I'm betting on the bounce back, and you know, when you look at I'd rather play him than Cup. I'd rather play him than Amon-Ra St. Brown, just because of the way I think that game is going to go.
Right.
I certainly like Chase, but Jefferson's $400 cheaper. So yeah, I like him more than Tyreek. So yeah, if you're going to an elite receiver, I really like Jefferson this week.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it sets up nicely for him too. I think Jordan Addison kind of gets squeezed out here with Hawkinson. Hawkinson had 1 week to ramp up. He had like 4 targets, and last week he had 9. So I
Yeah,
mean, I think he's
exactly.
I think he's back to business as usual. And I know it was with Kirk Cousins last year, but before he got hurt, I mean, he was like a focal point in this offense. Justin
Yep.
Jefferson would take a little bit of the attention away, and Hawkinson would just sit there and kind of
You
handle
get all the
business.
underneath
So
stuff. Yep.
yep. So I want to check Darnold's price real quick before we move on because he ends up being a fun tournament play, 7,500, and then over on
Yeah.
DraftKings, 6,100. So I mean it. I think it's doable. I think it's very contrarian to play Justin Jefferson this week because everybody will pay up for running backs instead. And with how wide receiver has been this year, everybody has gotten hurt or died. It seemed. But he ends up being like the last man. Him and Justin or Jamar Chase end up being like the last guys standing that have this elite ceiling to him. So he's if you're paying up, I agree with you. He ends up being the favorite pay up wide receiver play.
Yeah, and I think he will. I think you're right. I think he will be kind of contrarian in that. Obviously, Chase isn't available on DraftKings, but I think most people are going to be looking to pay up for running back and kind of fit into that mid tier receivers. So I think
Yeah.
Jefferson will be kind of underowned relative to his abilities. So yeah, he's someone I'm going to be trying to sneak into. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to do it in cash too much, just because he is really expensive, and that makes it tough to kind of build a strong cash lineup. But and in cash, I'm playing Hawkinson all over the place at tight end. So uh, I don't necessarily want to go to Vikings, but uh, I do like Jefferson in a tournament setting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like I said, just DraftKings, he ends up being the highest price player, but over on FanDuel, it ends up a little more easier. But like I
Yeah,
said, if you're paying 8K, you're probably paying for Kamara, you're probably paying for McCaffrey over Jefferson. Jefferson ends up being the contrarian who ends up getting like 20 plus points and kind of
right.
the key to open everything else up for you.
Yep. So yeah, I think this is a fun game for a really an under 40 total game.
Yeah.
My concern is, like you said, that this turns into an absolute blowout, and it turns into Aaron Jones all day in the side of Cam Akers in the second half or whatever. But yeah, I like this game for Minnesota quite a bit.
Yep.
All right, next game, the other super low, just gross AFC South play is the Jacksonville Jaguars traveling to Detroit. This game has a 47-point total, with the Jacksonville Jaguars having these tied for the second lowest implied total of the week. So, as you can tell, Detroit has the highest implied total of the week. Jacksonville is a 13.5-point dog. So, Detroit with a 30.25 implied total, Jacksonville 16.75. There's a ton to do in Detroit. I think everybody can figure that out. Is there anything you're interested in Jacksonville with Mac Jones pulling the trigger again?
Absolutely not. I've got no interest in the Jaguar stuff. I don't think you even need to have a bring back if you're playing the Lions stuff. Jared Goff threw 400 picks this week. This we chased this last week with the Vikings. I'm gonna go right back to it. I think this ends up being like a bounce back spot for Jared Goff, and they try to
Yep.
reiterate it. Jameson Williams ends up in the Jordan Addison role, where I think he ends up being the guy this week. Both running backs are in play. I mean, David Montgomery's the hammer, and then Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, I don't hate pairing Jared Goff with Jahmyr Gibbs and say Jameson Williams because we haven't seen Amon Ra get there his volume like he has in the past for his price. So if they run a screen to Gibbs, he goes like for 80 yards like we've seen before. That ends up going to Jared Goff as well. Jameson Williams has a bomb. Jared Goff has 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. The Sam Laporte is out this week, and we got Brock Wright and Zylstra, I believe, as the tight ends there. I'm not going to play either of them, but they end up being kind of like mid price. Uh, it's very hard to, as it is every week, to try to figure out the Lions, but I'm gonna play some Jared Goff stuff and hope he gets there in the first half. And Jameson Williams will be my preferred way of getting there.
Yeah, the one thing I'm really not playing on the Detroit side is Amon Ra. I remember when they played Tennessee in kind of a similar spot, like the game just went off the rails. You had the a couple long special teams plays. You had a bunch of turnovers by Tennessee, and I think this game's and I think he had a touchdown, but I think he had like 2 targets. He just wasn't involved in the offense. It was all Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery's. I don't mind playing Gibbs and Montgomery in the same lineup.
Yeah,
I can get there because I think this is going to be I think this game's over probably by the middle point of the second quarter. Um, yeah, there's just nothing I'm interested in. Like I was interested in Evan Ingram last week, but it just didn't happen. Mac Jones just looked I think he had negative fantasy points. He was so bad last week.
yeah.
I, I try to be not married to what happened last week and look at the bigger picture, but I can't look at that and not think that Mac Jones is just absolutely hammered garbage, and I can't get there with any of the Jags.
Yeah, I think there's an article came out that like Doug Peterson's gonna get fired this week.
Potentially,
So
yeah, that's
yeah, and it's just like everybody knows if you felt like you needed a bring back and just hope that Brian Thomas catches the bomb, like he ends up it's too expensive, 6,600. I'd rather
But he
play.
will be super contrarian though. There's no doubt.
Yeah, it just I can't do that way. But like I said, I do want to lean into the Jared Goff stuff. He ends up being a little pricier than I'd like him to be, 8,300 over on FanDuel, and then on DraftKings, he ends up being 6,300. So I mean, I don't want to call it premium pricing, but you are paying up a little bit. But this is a spot. Jaguars defense has been the worst in the entire nation, world, galaxy. Thought we had it last week with Sam Darnold. I'm going to go right back to it with
Yep,
Jared Goff this week.
100%. All right, let's move on to our next game. That is this is a game that I think is kind of low key one of my favorite games, and I think this game is just going to smash the over. That's the Los Angeles Rams at New England. Rams are 4-point road favorites. 43 and a half is the total, so 23.75 implied total for the Rams, 19.75 for New England. Man, the Rams played Monday night, so they're coming off a short week. West Coast Dome team going east to play an early window game outdoors in November. I think this is a smash spot for the Pats. I like them. I like them to cover. I like them to go way over their implied total. And I think that's going to keep the Rams offense in play in this. So, yeah, I think this is a really sneaky DFS spot.
Yeah, I wrote on my notes I want to like this game more, just because if something feels weird about it, to like where it can get a little sneaky. Ramondre Stevenson is a guy who I never play, but I think ends up in an awesome spot here. I'm gonna
Yep.
check his. He ends up 6,100, and his volume. I mean, 8.7 last week in Chicago, but 22, 23. He's got a good ceiling on him, and with Drake May at the helm, I mean, Drake May has quietly gotten there, especially with his feet. He ends up being dirt cheap as well. Give me just a second here. 5,600 over on the DraftKings, and then FanDuel, he ends up being bottom of the barrel. This will load, excuse me, real quick. 6,700. I
Yeah.
mean, and he
Cheaper
ends
than
up like,
Levis.
yeah, 12, 17, 20, 21. If he gets into kind of a shootout here, you could play. Matt Stafford has not been great this year. Feels like he's been a little off compared to the past, but I mean, Puka and Cooper Cup end up in the same 8,800, 8,300. I'd rather play Puka at that price. I think he ends up being the better wide receiver, but ends up, if you want to play like some Drake May stuff, I'd probably make sense to go back to the well on Hunter Henry after he kind of burned me last week. But if you play him, you play Booty. Trying to think. It's I don't hate it. Like it ends up. I think this game could definitely shoot its over and get a little more action than people probably see on paper.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I want to play all the kind of known elements of the New England offense. So I love Stevenson this week. I like Hunter Henry this week. It's tough because I'm just loading up on Hawkinson, but Henry is kind of my number 2 tight end this week, especially
Right.
with Kittle out, and we'll talk about that. So yeah, I like that. I love Drake May at his price. I do want to get some Bo Nix in there as well, and he's kind of in that same tier. But yeah, I think May's going to go really under-owned because I don't think people trust this offense, and I just think this is a really smash spot for them. So I want to get to New England, and I love Puka this week. Like he had 14 targets last week.
Yep.
His target share since he came back is just insane. And even the game he got kicked out of for punching a dude in the head, he still had 4 targets in the first quarter. So, like, he's getting target. He is the number 1 option in this. It's the same thing as last year, right? I mean, he's just the number 1 option in the passing game. Cooper Kupp is getting some work, but he's clearly the number 2. I like Kyron as well. I think this is a game. Like, I think this game is going to shoot out. So, yeah, I love both sides of this game.
Yeah, it's definitely a great tournament play, and I'm glad you brought up Kyron Williams because it seems like everybody just tries to fade him. Like nobody wants to play him for whatever reason, and it just ends up, 12, 10, 22, 19, 19, 20. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, he is expensive, but it's a
the
tough game.
work's going to be there. So
Exactly.
it's like I said, I'm with you. Just kind of, I think, like I said, you can play this and open some other stuff up as well. Just because Puka and Nakua and Cooper Kupp are priced high, but they are not like the top tier like they have been in the past. I think they end up being affordable for what they can do.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're afraid that this game, that the Rams are just going to blow out New England and they don't have to throw the ball, I don't think that's going to happen. I think this game's going to shoot out. So this is my under the radar favorite DFS game of the day.
There you go. So
All
it's a good
right.
one.
Yep. One more early afternoon window game. That is the 13-time NFL champion Green Bay Packers. It's Bears week, ladies and gentlemen. Traveling to Chicago. Packers are 5.5-point favorites. I'm sorry. 40.5 is the total in this game, which kind of just screams how bad the Chicago offense is. So 23-point implied total for the Packers, 17.5-point implied total for the Bears. Breaking out the colors today. It is Bears week. How you feeling about this one?
Don't think Shane Waldron being gone really changes much for the Bears. If I had to pick anybody on that side, probably Rome Odunze once again. But Packers stuff's interesting. I don't think anybody is going to play it. Jordan Love ends up being like one of the higher ceiling quarterbacks on the slate, and he's going to go under-owned. Being a nice bounce back spot for Jaden Reed, who I don't think is kind of fallen off like over the last month compared to what he started out as. Romeo Doubs always gets there, it seems like. And it just, I kind of want to play some Jordan Love stuff. Just trying to figure out the puzzle ends up being just the hardest part of it, as always. Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, they end up, I don't think anybody's going to play either of them. We've seen Tucker Kraft's ceiling, so that ends up being pretty interesting too. So it's, I think Packers win. I hope Jordan Love's healthy. I just don't know how to stack Jordan Love, which seems to be the problem for everybody most of the time.
Yeah, I will say this: like the Bears are a very heavy zone defense. They're a heavy cover 3, so that sets up well for Jaden Reed and Romeo Doubs. They are the better zone guys. Watson and Wicks are more the man-to-man guys. So I think this sets up really well for Jaden Reed. I think Josh Jacobs is wildly underpriced at 7,400 for what his role is. We thought Marshawn Lloyd was going to come back, and then he wakes up with appendicitis on Friday. Sorry, dude. It's been his rookie. He is dead. His rookie year is just absolutely dead. So not happening. So if you're in a managed league season long, just cut him. It's not happening. So yeah, I think Reed is pretty well priced. He's cheaper than Drake London on FanDuel, 7,700, right there with Zay Flowers. So I like his role. Like I said, I like the bounce back. Remember, Romeo Doubs had 2 touchdowns in this game last year. In week 1. So I like Dobbs as a super cheap price or cheap like punt play. And then like I said, I'd like Tucker Kraft, but I can't get there because I like Hunter Henry more and I like TJ Hawkinson a lot more. So I can't get there. Jordan Love is, I want to play him, but he's pretty expensive. Actually, he's not on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, I think he is.
Yeah.
So
DraftKings, he's pretty pricey, but like over on FanDuel, he is in the Russell Wilson, Geno Smith tier.
Yeah, so there I'm more interested.
Yeah, Geno Smith just lost his center this week somehow, which I don't know. Jordan Love, like if you look at this pocket, like right here, he ends up. I mean, that's the best play out of all these guys. So I'm gonna definitely get some Jordan Love stuff, and I think listening to you, I'm just gonna play Reed and Dobbs and go about it that way. It just makes the most sense.
Yeah, my problem with Love is like, I don't want to play him on DraftKings, and on FanDuel there's there's some lower price options that we're going to talk about that I like that are just I think they have the kind of same ceiling and they're quite a bit cheaper. So, but we'll get there.
Right.
So that's the end of the early window games. Let's move on to the late window. We got 3 games, only one 425 game. Everybody's going to have to watch the Bills and Chiefs. Not that that's a bad thing, but getting forced to watch the Chiefs again. So let's start off with the 405 games. We've got Seattle at San Francisco, 48-point total on this one. So that's a high total game. Seattle 6-point road underdog, 21-point implied total for them, 27 for the Niners. No George Kittle, it sounds like. We got that news overnight. I don't think I think McCaffrey affects Kittle more than vice versa, but I think that this opens up some touches for McCaffrey as well.
Yeah, it's Brock Purdy. This 49ers team is not the same one as last year. And if you people who haven't watched it and kind of like see the box score, it's like, oh, they're just playing the hits. It like Christian McCaffrey got there last week, but it was not the normal. I mean, he also had a pretty tough matchup, but at the same time, he goes right back to the well at 9,800. I've made a cash lineup with him, and Kamara just punted wide receivers, and I think he'll get there. But I mean, that's a brutal price, and Seattle almost feel like the wheels are about to fall off just on this offense. I know DK Metcalf comes back, but Juwan Jennings is a guy that I'm pretty interested in. It seems like he's going to end up having a pretty decent role. He ends up being 6,200, so he ends up being pretty cheap on FanDuel, and then on DraftKings 5,300. So that's like he's the guy that sets up, especially with George Kittle out. So it'd be Debo, Juwan Jennings, and then probably Ricky Pearsall, who I know he kind of got there last week. I'm just not going to do it. But if you want to play the Brock Purdy stuff, I think Debo and Juwan Jennings is pretty interesting. It just ends up being really pricey. And if you are playing Christian McCaffrey, I mean you are punting just about everything else. You're probably
A lot.
playing. Yeah, if you're on FanDuel, you're probably playing Chase Brown and Audric Estime. Those would be your punt wide receiver or running backs, and then your wide receivers will be the mid tier. If you're on DraftKings, I mean DraftKings pricing this week is so tight. You're playing double tight end. You're probably playing double punt tight end. I mean, it just ends up getting really goofy there. So he'll be in my cash lineup. I'm probably going to fade him in tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, the way you want to attack Seattle is on the ground, which leads to a ton of McCaffrey. But like you said, he's crazy expensive, and that makes it really tough, especially on DK. Jennings is the same price as Cedric Tillman, which makes it just hard for me to go there with him. I do want to get some Debo in my lineups, but I'm not going to force it really, just because I'm more interested in him with Kittle being out. But
Right.
man, he's been so beat up this year. It's really hard to trust him. So I don't know if I can get there in cash. So yeah, this is a really hard game for me because I think it really all comes like McCaffrey had like 13 fantasy points with no touchdown last week. So
Yep.
it's like if he gets a couple touchdowns, he could just smash the slate. But man, he's just so expensive. It's really tough. And like
Yeah.
the Seattle side, it's like, do I want Metcalf? Do I want JSN? Do I want Ken Walker? Like, I don't think they're not all going to get there. So you got to kind of pick your poison if you want to play. It does have a high over under, so I think Vegas is expecting Seattle to put up some points, but I don't know how I want to go about it. That's the
Yeah.
problem.
I'm not near as interested in Seattle stuff. Their interior offensive line is, especially with the center retiring this week, it is an abomination. I mean, it is terrible. They've had problems all year, interior. Now you lose your center. I think this ends up being a spot where Gino just kind of gets drilled. And I think on paper, this game looks good, like with all the playmakers, but I think the actual game, I think it's probably going to be a lower, maybe play like Christian McCaffrey and just don't think much else kind of gets there. So I'm going to stay. I'll be underweight on this game today, and I think a lot of people are going to try to play into it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are thinking of the game. Was it Thursday night game that they played in Seattle a couple weeks ago, and that game put up a lot of points. I think this is
Yep.
a really different situation. Like you said, the Seattle offensive line problems, Christian McCaffrey being back. I think that leads San Francisco to just run the ball more and kind of eat up some clock. So yeah, this is a game that I'm not going to be attacking this game either. So let's move on to what I think is a more fun game, and that is the Atlanta Falcons traveling to Denver. Atlanta, a 2-point road dog. 45 is the total on this one. So Denver's a 23.5 point implied total, 21.5 for Atlanta. I think there's a lot to like in this game. What do you think?
Yeah, if you are playing cash this week, I think Bo Nix ends up being a great cash game quarterback. So for FanDuel, is basically between him, Herbert, and Brock Purdy. And I'm thinking about leaning Herbert, but like especially on DraftKings, I think Bo Nix ends up being a pretty good cash quarterback. And then he's got a little bit of a ceiling to him. The Falcons, I just can't figure out. Last week, I thought they had a awesome spot. Bijan's been getting there. He ends up being a really awesome, I think, cash play and a tournament play. Even if you ignore them trying to give Tyler Algier 3 goal line runs before Bijan blasted in on 4th down. So I like Bijan here, even though the Broncos defense has been overall decent. I know you talked up Cortland Sutton a little bit, so I'll let you have your piece with that one. But like I said, Bo Nix ends up probably being the best cash game quarterback on the slate. His price is where 6,200 over on DraftKings, and he ends up being pretty cheap on FanDuel too, to where you can kind of just play 7,400. You kind of smash all the running backs and stuff in.
Yeah, I mean, the way I'm looking at this is a Falcons, like the Falcons can put no pressure on the quarterback. They can't cover. They just gave up MVS's best fantasy game of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I love Cortland Sutton this week. If you look at his last 3 weeks, 9 targets, 10 targets, 11 targets, 16 fantasy points, half PPR fantasy points, 22 and 3/4, 16.12. I mean, he's just getting there. He's getting it
Yeah.
done. This is a great matchup for him. I like Bo Nix as well. And yeah, like we heard that I kind of like Drake London this week. We heard Drake or Darnell Mooney was kind of dinged up, had a little bit of an Achilles injury, and then he missed practice and then he came back. So I'm a little concerned about that. So I kind of like, I think Drake London's going to go really under owned because people are afraid of the Pat Surtain thing, and the Broncos secondary is really good. So I think Drake London makes a nice contrarian play for tournaments. But yeah, it's like, and Bijan was I mean, he was basically the best skill player uh, last week in DFS.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, the usage is just concerning because we thought Tyler Algier was dust, and then they kind of bring him back last week. So, and I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball. I think, or they're going to be able to just sit back and run the ball. I think they're going to have to play up. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I want to go to the pass catchers for Atlanta in this one, even though it seems kind of contrarian a little bit just because of the Broncos pass defense is very good. But that's the way I think I want to attack it from the Atlanta side.
Yeah. And I brought up Audric Estime just because it seems like he is
Yep.
starting to take over. I think if you're playing him, you're hoping for a touchdown. He's a
Yeah.
very like one trick pony. So it's not a play that I want to play, but I think people will try to. He'll have some ownership just because he opens up some other stuff. But like I said, the Falcons, I wish I could figure out because we've seen Kirk Cousins have these monster games, but just I don't know. It's very goofy, but it's like I said, it's a great contrarian play. I played it last week, got burned pretty bad, so just it's just kind of tough. But I'm glad you brought up Cortland Sutton because that was kind of my blind spot. I didn't realize over the last month how big his games have been, and for that price, I mean that ends up being a smash spot against the Falcons, who couldn't stop a nosebleed right now.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's another game that I like quite a bit, especially on the Denver side. Estime, yeah, I think he's going to have very high ownership, but I think he's just or cheap Nick Chubb, and he just
Yeah,
has no pass game work. He had like Javonte Williams is dust, Jaleel McLaughlin is dust, but um, I don't, like you said with Estime, he's going to have to get a touchdown to pay off because he's really inefficient. He's between the tackles grinder. So, but if he gets, it could happen. So, but I think his ownership's going to be so high that I'm comfortable fading him.
yeah, easy enough, easy enough.
All right, let's get on to the final game of the late afternoon window, the last game of the DK slate. That is the big game of the day, the Kansas City Chiefs traveling to Buffalo. Vegas just does not understand that you do not make Patrick Mahomes an underdog, but they did here. So 46-point total, Chiefs 2-point road underdogs, 24-point implied total for the Bills, 22 for Kansas City. I think Vegas making Mahomes an underdog just means they're automatically going to win, but how do you want to play it for DFS?
It's honestly, I don't have much interest in this game. If I did, I'd probably play Josh Allen just because of his ceiling. But Keon Coleman's out, Dalton Kincaid's out, so that makes Dawson Knox like a one of probably the higher owned tight ends. Him and Davis Allen, I believe, for the Rams. I forgot to talk about earlier. They end up being like the punt tight end plays. Um, it's I think Khalil Shakir will have a lot of ownership, and he just I don't know. With all due respect, I like him as a player, but his like ceiling or lack thereof 8, 18, 10, 2.9. Like I'd rather go elsewhere at this price. I don't have time for that, even though a lot of the weapons are out. But James Cook will be a guy who will go really under owned, but Chiefs defense has been really good this year. So it just and then the Chiefs side, a lot of these guys get expensive. Like Travis Kelce, you're paying up a tight end. It's I just don't have much interest in this game, honestly. As bad as that sounds, I just don't think it really gets there.
Yeah. I mean, the Chiefs have the best run defense in the league, and it's not really close. So I don't know that I can't really get there with James Cook. So I'm kind of okay with playing Josh Allen naked, but he's really expensive. I mean, he's only $200 cheaper than Lamar Jackson on DK. So like,
Yeah.
I'd rather play Lamar in that spot against in a much better environment. Yeah, the KC, like, I kind of like Kareem Hunt a little bit just because the Bills, like, the way you attack the Bills is through the run game. And I think he's not super expensive. So if you need to pay down a little bit at running back, I'm okay with that. And Kelsey, yeah, he's had some smash games against Buffalo in the past, but I don't want to pay up a tight end this week. I'd rather go to the guys we've talked about, the Hawkinsons, the uh, Hunter Henrys. So, I mean, yeah, if you want to pay up a tight end, I think the answer is Kelsey, but
I
I don't know that I want to do that.
I know Hunt has gotten there, but for $200 more on FanDuel, you can have Alvin Kamara.
Yeah,
$300 more Jameer
that's a
Gibbs.
good
Like
point.
that's really tough for me to swallow. If he was like more mid price, like I know his production's not been mid price, but I just I don't know. I don't like this game. Both defenses have been really good this year.
Yep.
But, I mean, honestly, last week the Colts, if they had any brain cells, they probably should have beat the Bills. I mean, Bills looked terrible. Josh Allen had multiple turnovers and kind of kept the Colts into it until Joe Flacco returned the favor. So it just, I know this game has been wild and it'll probably be a close game, but it's just not a game that I'm really going to this week.
Would you play either of these defenses as like super contrarian options? Because I don't think anyone is going to. They're both kind of mid price, but
I wouldn't think so. Like if I'd probably play Chiefs defense just because we know Josh Allen. Like last week, he didn't have a really good game. They had a bunch of turnovers, but I just don't think you need to either. That's the other part of it. Like Saints defense is cheap on FanDuel. I'd rather play Saints defense, even if I'm eating some
yep.
chalk. Just I don't know. I just don't. I just don't love it. It's tough. Like Bills defense 4,400, Chiefs defense 3,900. I just like I said, I'd rather play Chiefs over the Bills, but at the same time, I just don't. Not really interested. I'll let
Yeah,
everybody
Mike,
else have that.
on DK, you can get the Dolphins playing the Raiders and super turnover machine Gardner Minshew at at less than the Chiefs. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think it will be contrarian, but I still think there's better options.
yeah, I do as well. So
All right, let's get to the FanDuel Sunday night game. And like we talked about this before the show, I think if you want to win on FanDuel this week, you're going to have some action in this game. That is the Bengals at the Chargers. 48 is the total on this one, so one of the higher totals of the slate. Chargers are a 1-point favorite at home, so basically a pick 'em 24.5 point implied total for Los Angeles, 23.5 for the Bengals. a lot to do in this one. It's kind of strange for a Sunday night game. I think it's going to be so influential on the overall FanDuel slate. But what do you like in this one?
Everything, especially over on FanDuel. You can play the Herbert stuff. It ends up being really cheap. You play Herbert, you play Will Dissly, you play Ladd McConkey, who had a bad game last week just because they didn't need him against Tennessee. That ends up setting up well for going up against the Bengals defense or lack thereof. And if the Bengals won any games and like Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson wasn't around, Joe Burrow would be in the MVP conversation. I mean, he
Yeah.
is like automatic 4 touchdowns. I know Chargers defense has been really good, but I mean, Joe Burrow over the last month, I mean, just 36, 30, 37 points against Baltimore last time, 28. I mean, he's got an awesome ceiling here. Even against the Chargers, I think Bengals basically have to win out. They really have, if they want to make the playoffs, they have no room for error here, and they're probably going to have to win this one. And I just think this game will go back and forth. Chase Brown ends up being dirt cheap as far as running backs go over on FanDuel. He's 6,800. He's going to have a decent amount of ownership. I'm fine with it because he's been really good too over the last couple weeks now that Zach Moss is out. 17, 27, 10. So he sets up nice. T. Higgins returns. It's very expensive to play him, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. But like I said, if the Bengals want to win, that's how they're going to do it. So I've been very happy to pay those prices to get that double stack there.
Yeah, I think Herbert's pricing is just kind of really insane obviously on FanDuel, 7,300. But I mean, if you look at his attempts since the bye. I mean, it's 18, obviously it didn't need him last week, but 27, 32, 39, 34, 27. They've been throwing the ball since they came out of the bye. It's a different team. I think we talked about this last week. So yeah, I like McConkey this week. I like Quentin Johnson this week.
Yep, he's quietly gotten there. I mean, he helped.
Yeah,
me
I
last
mean he's
week.
super cheap. If he gets a touchdown, he's going to help you. So yeah, I like him. I don't mind Will Dissly as a tight end. Like I said, there's options I like better, but if you need to pay down, I'm okay with that. Love the Chargers this week, and I mean, you got to like the Bengals passing game no matter who they're going up against. Burrow's just absolutely getting it done every week. Jamar Chase is expensive. Obviously, he's the highest priced receiver. So I would rather play Jefferson. But T. Higgins is back, and I think he's going to have a role. He's 7,100. He's cheaper than JSN. He's the same price as Darnell Mooney, basically. Same price as Josh Downs. When he's played this year, he has been involved. So
Yep.
I want to have some exposure to him too.
Yeah, if you feel like you just need to play one pass catcher, like I think that's fine. I mean, T. Higgins back. He seems like he's going to be fully healthy. If you want to play the cheaper one, I don't think a lot of people will play Jamar Chase because, like I said earlier, they're probably just going to play the running backs. But it's I like this game overall. I think Chase Brown, like I said, will have some ownership. And the one guy we didn't talk about, J.K. Dobbins. Uh, Bengals defense overall has just been terrible. He's a guy who could get there as well, and he's a really fun tournament play.
Yep, absolutely. All right, yeah, I love that game. I think this is fun for. Normally, I hate the Sunday night game on FanDuel, but I think this is a fun one. I think you're gonna have to sweat this one if you don't have any access to this game. So,
Yep.
before we get to flag plants, we got some questions. Appreciate everybody checking in. Question from OK: do you need one Detroit minimum? Also, Russ Ridley or Goff JMO on DKGPP. So, do you need one Detroit minimum?
I don't think so. Just because I worry even if they blow out the Jags, like they don't have to put the foot on the gas, and that would be my worry. So say if they like Jameson Williams has touchdown for 30 yards and they don't need him again, like 10, 11, 12 points is great, but it's not 20 that you're hoping for. I don't think you have to do it, but yeah, especially on DraftKings because it's going to be pricey too. I don't think you need to do it, but the other question here, I'm going with Goff and J-Mo and just hoping. My thought process here is hoping that the Lions like just blow them out the first half, and Jared Goff could get like 3 touchdowns, and like they try to right the wrong from last week, and even if they don't need it the second half, like he's already gotten there and kind of opens up that. So that's kind of where I'm going this week.
Yeah, and I think if you look at this big picture, like we talked about before, I think this game plays out fairly similarly to the Tennessee game for Detroit, in that like they can absolutely blow them out and they can put up 50 points, but it could be so spread around that there's not one guy who's absolutely carrying you. That said, of these two options, I would go with Goff Jamo because I do like Jamo this week. I think he's going to get involved, and I don't think you're going to have David Montgomery throwing a touchdown this week. I think they're one like Goff isn't going to throw 5 picks again. I think they're going to want to get him back, back to being Jared Goff. So I do like him this week. So I would give a slight lean to Goff Jamo.
Yep. So next question here. We've got Javonte or Estimate today. Oh, man. I'm going to go
Javonte's
Estimate.
dead.
Yeah, I'd go Estimate, but if you can dig up something else, so I'd probably be preferred, but it's definitely Estimate. I think Javonte's done for.
Yeah, of the two, it's estimated because, Javonte's dust. He's just not involved in the offense anymore. Then London or Jaden Reed? Other league, London or JSN?
I'm going to go London over JSN first. And then London or Jaden Reed. I feel like London is safer. I mean, he has quietly gotten there. He gets the targets and stuff. If you're shooting for upside, be Jaden Reed. But I think it's going to be London for both for me.
I'm definitely taking London over JSN. I'm the exact opposite. I'm taking London for upside and Jaden Reed for floor. I just think I don't know that Jaden Reed can kind of. I don't think he has that upside. I do think London does because he's had a bunch of targets last week, or he didn't get there. He didn't have a touchdown, but he had a bunch of targets. Let me look real quick.
12 targets last week.
13 targets I got. So
Or
it depends on where you go, but 8 catches, 97 yards. You throw a touchdown on top of that, he's a 20-point player, even on half PPR. So
Right.
I think he's, like I said, like we talked about earlier, I think he's going to be contrarian because I think the community is going to look at the Denver pass defense and say that he can't get there. But I think with Mooney being dinged up, I think he's going to be the number one option. We didn't mention Kyle Pitts, and that's for a reason. So,
Yeah.
so I like London ceiling this week, but yeah, but just for safety, I think it's Jaden Reed.
Yeah,
So
especially
we're diametrically opposed on that one.
If Jordan Love is healthy, like that makes up a lot of it. So that'd be the other part of the program. He's been really banged up the last couple weeks, and the bye week will certainly help him.
Yeah, we've heard from LaFleur and just kind of coming out of Green Bay that he's not on the injury report. He's 100% for the first time basically since that Philly game week 1. So I think that also opens up a little bit of him running and moving around a little bit. He's really struggled against the blitz, and I think that's because of his limited mobility. And he's been the most blitz quarterback in the league because I think other teams understand that. So I think he's going to come back, but I think it's going to be kind of spread around. I think Reed and Dobbs are both going to have some action, and obviously Josh Jacobs is going to be in there as well. One more question from Cole Fitterer. Thank you for checking out the show. Hunter Henry or Mark Andrews?
I'm going to lean Andrews here. He's finally starting to seem healthy. I don't know if the car wreck kind of messed with him or the injury last year kind of. But, I mean, he's been catching touchdowns and seems like he's been much more part of the game plan. So I'm going to go Mark Andrews here. Just especially after last week, Hunter Henry. I'm going to go back to Hunter Henry, but he burned me for Austin Hooper. It seemed like Austin Hooper was getting a lot of stuff last week when I played Henry. We both liked him a lot. So I'm going to go Mark Andrews here.
I will say if this is just a standard lineup question, it's Mark Andrews. If this is a DFS question, I like Henry at his price more than I like Andrews at his. I'll say that.
So Mark Andrews, the last 5 games, 15.8, 3.6 was his low one, but then he had 12.1, 18.1, 14.1. So, I mean, over the last month, outside of 1 week, he is starting to kind of get there again.
Yep. They do get Isaiah Likely back this week. I think that's why he had such a good game last week, is because Likely was totally out. But he's kind of established himself back into the offense. So, definitely. If it's just one or the other, I would rather start Andrews. But I think Henry in DFS at his price is just more attractive. All right. Let's go to flag plants. What's your number one?
I'm going to go with Jameson Williams. I'm just going right back to what we did last week with Jordan Addison. If Sam Darnold wouldn't have been an idiot, I think Jordan Addison would have set up for a really nice day. And I think the Lions are going to go back to getting Jared Goff back on track, and I think it goes through Jameson Williams. The Jaguars have given up an obscene amount of points to the wide receiver, too. And I just think it sets up nice for him. I think he has a couple bombs and probably be a slate breaker today.
Yeah, my first, no surprise, if you've listened to the show so far, is TJ Hawkinson. I think he's one of my favorite plays of the week. 4,700 on DK and 6,500 on FanDuel. Just like 2 weeks back from the injury, and he got 9 targets last week on, like I said, I think he had 38 snaps. So I think he has taken his place right back as the kind of key non-Jefferson piece of this offense. I think they bounce back. I don't think Darnold's going to throw 3 picks again. And like I said, they did move the ball last week. I'm not afraid of Tennessee's defense. I think a lot of their ranking is based on the fact that their offense is just putrid. Will Levis is terrible. Mason Rudolph is even worse. So yeah, I don't think teams need to kind of open it up against them. So I'm not concerned about the Tennessee defense. I love TJ Hawkinson this week. Number 2 for you.
I'm going to go with Devon Achane. You're talking about these running backs that you have to pay up for. I think he is going to be the one who kind of gets forgotten about. Like a lot of people are going to play Alvin Kamara. They're going to play Christian McCaffrey. I think Breece Hall is in that kind of realm. But Devon Achane, I think, has the matchup and he's got the ceiling. And with Tyreek Hill coming out, said that his hand hurts. Jalen Waddle doesn't get there. I mean, it's been the Devon Achane show. So I'm going to go here with him. It sets up really nice against the Raiders, and I think he ends up having a monster game.
HN is my favorite individual player this week, so I agree with you 100% on that one. My second, again, if you've listened to the show, no surprise, it's Courtland Sutton. Great matchup against the Falcons. I think Falcons will put up enough resistance that Denver's going to have to throw throughout this game. So I think there's going to be points in this game, both sides. And I like Bo Nix a lot in this game, and I like Courtland Sutton. He's putting up big numbers the last 3 weeks. He's getting big targets. He is the focal point of this offense right now. They can't run the ball, except unless it's Bo Nix. They can't run the ball. We talked about Estime, who is basically a 3 yards in a cloud of dust guy. Javonte Williams is dead. So this Denver team is just complete opposite of what we thought coming into the year. We thought it was going to be all the running backs and some, Sean Payton running backs getting targets out of the backfield. It's not, hasn't worked out that way, but Courtland Sutton has been really good. I never thought going into the year that I would be saying Courtland Sutton is my flag plant, but here we are. He is my flag plant this week, Courtland Sutton. All right, before we get out of here, Jameson, tell everybody what you got going on and where they can find you.
I'm over on the Twitter machine at Jameson Rules, over on Blue Sky as well. I think I'm just Jameson Hutchison over there. But if you aren't over there, it's very cool. Honestly, I'd highly recommend it. It's been very refreshing. So outside of that, Rider Dynasty every Thursday with JJ Wenner and Joseph Harlow over at IDP Plus, and then every Sunday with you making some money. So it's been awesome. Been doing really well this year. So that's it for me. What about you?
Yeah, you can also find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at the Joel Worth. Blue Sky has been pretty awesome. It's everything that's good about Twitter without everything that's terrible at Twitter. So I do like that quite a bit. Check out the Best Ball Show here on the IDP Plus network. It's been dropping late in the week, the last couple of weeks, just because I've had some work stuff and some sick stuff going on, but we'll be getting back to dropping that earlier in the week. And then the DFS top plays article will be coming back this week, so check that out. That's it for us this week. Week 11, we got to make some money. Dude, we only got like 6 weeks left until the end of the season, so it's time to start making your fortune right now. Let's get to it. So make money week 11. Thanks, everybody, for checking out the show, and we will see you next week.